At first, Balam Industries and Arquebus Corporation appear to be entirely interchangeable, such similarly faceless, soulless, archetypical megacorp antagonists that it's almost impossible to tell them apart. They share a lot of characteristics. They are both dystopian megacorporations that wield so much power they can challenge the government and win. They employ huge technologically advanced private armies that are big enough to invade and potentially conquer an entire planet. Private armies which operate with no ethical or public oversight whatsoever and answer only to the gluttonous whims of the corporations. And these two corporate antagonists share an identical motivation. They have both invaded the quarantined wasteland planet of Rubicon in search of remnants of coral, a mysterious and dangerous substance which contains nearly limitless energy potential. They seek coral for no reason other than power and profit. They are both willing to slaughter and destroy anyone who stands in their way. Both Balam and Arquebus are greedy, selfish, callous, destructive, authoritarian, exploitative, and short-sighted. However, unlike a lot of other dystopian megacorp antagonists, in a lot of other dystopian fiction, Balam and Arquebus are not actually faceless. They both employ AC squads which serve as the elite units of their private armies. The Red Guns fight for Balam and the Vespers fight for Arquebus. Over the course of the story, the commanders of these two squads end up representing and even defining these two otherwise soulless corporations. The commanders become the human face of their respective corporation, and through them, Balam and Arquebus actually end up having a lot of personality. The commander of the Red Guns is Michigan. Michigan is this sort of clownish drill sergeant character who seems pretty silly at first, but then turns out to be an actually pretty decent guy. One of the few genuinely respectable AC pilots serving in the corporate armies. The deputy commander of the Vespers is Snail. In a lot of ways, he is the exact opposite of Michigan. At first, Snail seems like just a smug jerk, a typical sneering bully. But later on turns out to be something much more devious and much more dangerous, even sort of violently insane. A deconstruction of the villainy of Balam and Arquebus is inevitably going to be a deconstruction of these two characters, Michigan and Snail, and they will be the focus of this video. But before we get to them, let's talk a little more about the corporations they represent. Balam and Arquebus are two more in a long line of corporate antagonists in the Armored Core series. Since the very first entry in the Armored Core series, the settings of these games have been dominated by dystopian umbrella corporations who wage relentless and basically pointless wars against each other, heedless of the suffering and death these conflicts inflict on the civilian population caught in the middle. These are dystopian settings where business interests reign supreme, openly greedy, who care only for their own power, and are dismissive of both individual rights and community welfare. Perhaps, thematically, these corporations speak to an anxiety concerning the growing power of massive real-world corporations, or maybe an anxiety concerning how little human life and human rights matter in the face of business interests. Or maybe it creates a setting where the writers can tell a story about the power of the individual will. After all, in a setting where corporations reign, a story about the ultimate triumph of an individual over those corporations can be even more inspiring. Or maybe we're just trying to create a setting where cool, hyper-advanced combat mechs can battle it out in a war-torn apocalyptic landscape, because that's cool and this is an action video game, not Shakespeare. We don't need meaningful thematic justifications for everything we do. Whatever the reason, megacorp antagonists have become essential to the DNA of the Armored Core series. And so both Balam Industries and Arquebus Corporation, or at least corporations like them, sort of have to be here. Armored Core 6 was always going to have a pair of megacorp villains. The question the writers faced here was, well, how are we going to make these new megacorps different? How are we going to make them interesting? How are we going to use this old trope to tell a new and compelling story? And I actually think the writers did a really good job finding answers to those questions. Through Michigan and Snail, these two new corporate bad guys have a lot of personality, a lot of individual character, a lot more here to dissect and discuss than some of the corporations in previous games. Before we really dig into that discussion, it's worth noting how little we actually know about either of these corporations. I've mentioned this in other videos, but Armored Core 6 has what I would call a very efficient story. It is a story stripped down to its most essential elements, and you can especially see that in the world building. We know so little about the world of Armored Core 6. Where do Balam and Arquebus and the PCA come from? Are they Earth organizations, galactic organizations, something else? When were Balam and Arquebus founded? By who? To do what? Where are they based? Even compared with previous Armored Core games, we know remarkably little about these two corporations. But moving on, let's begin with our examination of Balam Industries, how it is presented in the game, and how its corporate personality comes to be defined by Gun 1 Michigan. Okay, so Balam and Arquebus are the strongest corporate forces on the planet, and early on they appear to be about equal in power. However, as the story progresses, it becomes clear that Balam is actually just a complete joke. It is nearly laugh out loud funny how completely incompetent they are. Balam fails over and over again. They fail and fail and fail. It is hard to find a single success for Balam anywhere in the story. Early on, off-screen, Balam fails to climb the wall. Instead, after hiring Raven, their rival Arquebus successfully seizes control of that wall. Then, when Coral is discovered in the ice fields, Arquebus immediately moves in to begin their survey, with Balam scrambling to catch up after the fact, ever one step behind their more competent rival. After the PCA suppression fleet rockets onto the scene, Balam signs a truce with Arquebus, and they work together to defeat the PCA. However, behind Balam's back, Arquebus captures a bunch of PCA equipment and uses it to become the dominant military force on the planet. Balam was either too honest or too incompetent to do anything to stop this, or to do it themselves, or to even realize that it was happening. Finally, in the end, Balam rushes into Watchpoint Alpha ahead of Arquebus, and then get totally slaughtered by both the PCA's leftover automated defense systems, merely softening them up for Arquebus's later expedition, and by either Raven or Rusty. After this final blunder, Balam ceases to play any meaningful role in the fate of Rubicon. Their forces never appear inside the Institute City ruins, and they've completely vanished by the start of the game's 5th and final chapter. In terms of plot, it seems like Balam is mostly here to serve as a punching bag for Arquebus. They're here to, through their repeated failures and defeats at the hands of Arquebus, make the other corporations seem more powerful, more intimidating, more competent. The writers chose to make Balam fail so Arquebus could be a better villain. There may actually be an in-universe explanation for this failure. This datalog says, "For now, we shall monitor the observer's actions and provide indirect aid to Arquebus." This is Allmind, the supercomputer AI who is later revealed to be the true villain of the story. Here she is watching events unfold from a distance and subtly manipulating those events. Allmind says that she is providing some form of support to Arquebus in their conflict with Balam, though the exact nature of that support is not explained. So it's possible that Arquebus isn't actually any more competent than Balam. They're just getting secret support from a hyper-intelligent AI who is manipulating the conflict from behind the scenes. Anyway, let's move on from an examination of Balam Industries generally to an examination of Gun 1 Michigan specifically, the character who ultimately becomes the face and personality of Balam. Michigan is kind of the perfect face for Balam Industries, because they are a total joke of a corporation, and he is a total joke of a character, at least at first. Later on, he becomes much more interesting. To demonstrate what I mean, let's listen to Michigan's first voice lines in the game. Here they are.
Heard the good news from Walter, did ya? Good. Sit your ass down and listen. Balam's moving in on the Gallia Dam complex, one of the Liberation Front's bases. The objective is to destroy their lifeline and make those sacks of shit beg for mercy. I'll be sending 2 good-for-nothing maggots from the Red Guns, Gun 4 Volta and Gun 5 Iguazu. You're just gonna be tagging along on ass-wiping duty. I'm assigning you the call sign Gun 13, a lucky little number that just became available. Gun 13, sound off! Good enough. Now go get ready! We're going on a field trip, kiddo!
Michigan immediately sounds really silly, which is, of course, intentional. He's doing this ridiculous, over-the-top military drill sergeant performance that is just completely out of place in the otherwise miserable and dystopian setting of Armored Core 6. Michigan is the only character in the game who sounds like he's actually enjoying himself, who's not taking this story so seriously all the time. He's the only character in the game who cracks these stupid jokes. Most of Michigan's dialogue is like something out of a straight-to-VHS cheesy World War II action movie. It's even sillier because the whole time he's putting on this goofy performance, the Red Guns are failing all over the place. They are losing every engagement with Arquebus. The Red Guns are just a bunch of losers. However, there is more to Michigan's character than just this clownish buffoonery. He actually ends up being one of the most likable and most genuine characters in the whole game, even if he doesn't end up ever really playing a significant role in the story. Let's start by examining Michigan's arena bio. It reads, Commander of the Red Guns, the Balam Group's AC squad. Michigan took up leadership after a career as the commander of the Furlong Armed Fleet. There, he earned a reputation as a merciless, heavy-handed ogre of a man, and he was equally feared by friend and foe alike who knew him as Hell on 4 legs. Apparently, he has posted a bounty on his own head to Balam's bounty board, with the stipulation that half of the reward money is to be distributed among his former comrades at Furlong. For all his silliness, Michigan is stated to be one of the most powerful, experienced, and battle-hardened AC pilots in the game. Allmind ranks him as the second best AC pilot operating on planet Rubicon, second only to Freud in terms of raw talent. Most of this arena bio matches the over-the-top drill sergeant personality we've already seen, but that final line is really interesting. If anyone ever actually collects that bounty, Michigan wants half of the reward money to be distributed among his former comrades. There is a suggestion here that, unlike pretty much every other corporate mercenary, Michigan actually cares about his comrades and wants to give something back to them. Next, let's look at the arena bio for Red Gun 4 Volta. It reads, after beating the rebellious Volta and Iguazu into submission, Michigan made it his personal crusade to make something of the two, and thus began their daily hell. For the past 7 years, neither Volta nor Iguazu have achieved their goal, to punch the living daylights out of Michigan, then get the hell out of the Red Guns, as they would put it. Volta has since admitted defeat, and is now learning about business from Wu Huahai. That line, Michigan made it his personal crusade to make something of the two, is interesting to me. Iguazu and Volta were petty criminals who crossed Michigan and got their butts kicked for it, and then were both pressed into service with the Red Guns. That line doesn't say that Michigan tormented or bullied them for fun. It says that he worked them hard in an attempt to make something of them, to make them better than their past petty criminal selves. I think Michigan saw something in these two, some sort of potential, and he cared enough to force them to live up to that potential. That's a commander who cares enough to recognize and nurture potential in his subordinates, even if Michigan goes about it in a pretty brutal and unsympathetic way. Now let's look at one final arena bio, this one for Gun 2 Nile, to complete the picture of Michigan's character that the writers are painting. It reads, Nile distinguished himself with an exceptionally high arrest rate, and in those days the only man he never managed to put in handcuffs was Michigan, then the commander of the rival Furlong Armed Fleet. Having failed to arrest the man, he instead settled for a friendly drink with his old nemesis. Here, we see that Michigan is capable not only of setting aside old feuds, not only of sitting down with an old enemy for friendly drinks, but even of recruiting those old enemies, fighting alongside them as close allies. Michigan is a character who treats his enemies with respect, and in turn he wins the respect of those enemies, even sometimes their loyalty. Through these arena bios, the writers are building up a character for Michigan. He is someone who cares about his former comrades, who sees potential in even the most pathetic of his subordinates, and tries to build them up to that potential, even when they resent him for it. He's someone who treats others with respect. And that includes Raven, our player character. Michigan treats Raven with more respect than almost any other character in the game. Listen to this message where Michigan attempts to recruit Raven to the Red Guns.
Gun 13 Raven! That was a beautiful massacre at the wall. You're a survivor, no doubt. Let me give you some advice. Don't settle for being an independent. Join the Red Guns. Have a career. Climb the ranks. Keep that unlucky number, and eventually the curse will get you too. That's all. Don't forget what I said about putting you to work.
I think Michigan sounds genuinely concerned for Raven's well-being here. He really doesn't want Raven to fall to the curse of gun number 13, which is the call sign the Red Guns assign to the often short-lived independent mercenaries they hire to bolster their forces. And I think this is an honest offer. Michigan is offering Raven the stability of a career, the promise of advancement, the camaraderie of working together with a team. He recognizes talent and potential and doesn't want it to go to waste. Beneath all the bluster and the exaggerated soldierly bravado, Michigan is a good guy who actually cares about the soldiers under his command. He takes care of his own. He encourages his subordinates to fulfill their potential. He treats both friends and enemies with respect. This is a classic narrative trope. The gruff and seemingly callous military commander who actually cares deeply for the well-being of his troops. You can find this trope all over the place in war movies and police dramas. Michigan adds some much-needed humanity to the corporate character of Balam Industries. Through him, we see that these corporations aren't just faceless amalgamations of corporate drones, but are made up of actual people, and a lot of those people are just trying to do their best with what they have. In your final confrontation with Balam, you destroy both Michigan and basically all that's left of Balam's private army. It is a grueling and long battle, one of the toughest in the game. In this final battle, we can see that Michigan has inspired a lot of personal loyalty in his troops. He basically tells them, "Let's go die!" And they're all like, "Oh yeah, let's do it, let's all die!" I think that's because, in spite of all his gruff bluster, they recognize that he treats them with respect. This respect and care has won their loyalty. They are willing to die with their commander. I actually want to watch a little of this fight so we can hear some of Michigan's final words. Here they are.
Looks like Arquebus sent some clown on a suicide mission. Cute, real cute.
The only clown around here is you, Kennebec. You're talking about the wall climber, the worm killer, the only Gun 13 who's managed to live this long. Until the Liger Tail deploys, the odds are not in your favor. You better keep the emergency eject primed.
Yeah. I heard that Merc took down Gun 5 at Guasu.
Iguazu? Oh yeah, the deserter who pissed his pants and ran.
Oh, but hey, I forgot we still kept you around. Iguazu's worth 100 of you, which means, Albany, the Merc is worth 20 to him. You're doing nothing productive. Why don't you do the math for us?
The answer's 2,000 Albany, sir!
Shut your stinkhole and start shooting!
Sir, yes, sir!
Listen up, maggots. This field trip is now a hunting expedition. You can go home now, or follow me if you got a death wish.
Ready to die, sir!
Maggots, you read me. You can tell this to the stern. Mean old Michigan died of
AC Liger Tail destroyed. Gun 1 Michigan, down.
Notice when someone disparages Iguazu in this battle, who is a traitor who did go AWOL, who was a whiny loser who abandoned his comrades, and yet Michigan still leaps to his defense. Michigan goes out of his way to show a known traitor respect. Also, notice the way Michigan interacts with his troops here. The casual, often funny discourse. They have a really good rapport with their commander. They clearly respect him and are on friendly terms with him. Compare this to the way the Vespers interact with each other later, none of whom seem to be friends at all. There is a lot of humanity within the Balam private army, especially compared to Arquebus. There is a lot of character and personality on display here. And of course, listen to the way he talks about Raven. The wall climber, the worm killer. He dresses down his troops for underestimating you, actually recognizes the fact that you're probably gonna win this fight. This is so rare in a villain. Video game villains never ever recognize the potential of failure, never admit that the protagonist is stronger than them. Michigan is that rare one antagonist in 1,000 who has self-awareness, who admits the possibility of defeat. This moment transforms him into a really interesting character, unlike a lot of other villains I've covered on this channel. And in his final moments, he dies telling a joke. Michigan accepts his defeat, accepts his death, dies with dignity, dies with his ridiculous drill sergeant parody sense of humor intact. I was surprised at how sad I felt about his demise. Michigan was genuine and honest and respectful to a fault. And in this setting, it really is a fault. Armored Core is a truly dystopian setting where genuinely good-hearted individuals like Michigan cannot survive. They will always be outmaneuvered and backstabbed by less scrupulous and more devious characters like Snail. As I've already discussed a little, Michigan and Snail are portrayed as near total opposites. Where Michigan is loud and comical, Snail is quiet and conniving. Where Michigan cares about those under his command, Snail casually throws his subordinates' lives away whenever it best suits his plan. Where Michigan treats Raven with respect, Snail is contemptuous to his bitter last breath. There's only one scene in the entire game where Michigan and Snail actually appear together, and it's during the briefing for the Iceworm mission. Let's listen to that briefing now, so we can see them side by side, hear the differences in their characters.
First, some background before we go into detail. The intercorporate ceasefire is now in effect, and we will be carrying out coordinated attacks against the PCA. The targets are the enemy-occupied bases, the heavy warship fleet, and the recently activated...
I'll cut to the chase. This is an all-out war against the PCA and theaters across Rubicon. And y'all got the short end of the stick. You're here to take on the worst of our dirty work, hunting the beast of the ice field.
Sure thing, Chief. Tell you what, I'll watch and let you know how badly that goes for us.
Gun 5, you just volunteered yourself for the front line.
Snail starts off giving this very sober, very slow, very detailed and analytical overview of the joint operation against the PCA, and then Michigan almost immediately interrupts and takes over the briefing, providing a much more colorful description of the attack on the Iceworm. And I absolutely love the voice actor's delivery of that line, "the beast of the ice field." You can hear in their voices how different these two characters are. Michigan is this over-the-top, loud American action hero caricature, while Snail is this quiet, cold, and calculated, contemptuous English gentleman stereotype. And while Snail never says anything about it, it's very easy to imagine how resentful he is of Michigan here for having the audacity to interrupt him, for spoiling his carefully prepared briefing. As we'll see later, Snail is an egomaniac who believes everyone, and I mean absolutely everyone, every human being in the galaxy is beneath him and worthy of nothing but total contempt. But let's start at the beginning. The first time you will ever hear Snail's voice is right before and during the briefing for the Wall Climber mission. To understand how Snail's character is being introduced, we're going to listen to both clips. Here they are.
You must be the handler, I presume, for the independent mercenary Raven.
Honored to make your acquaintance, V2 Snail.
I understand you want to join Operation Wall Climber. You do realize that disposing of some Liberation Front garbage hardly qualifies you. Know your place, you meager dog-sitter. The answer is no.
I hear you're deploying V1 again. Must be rough only having one good pilot to rely on.
Oh? Are you suggesting your dog can take Freud's place?
You'll see. Just give us the chance.
Very well, then. We're also deploying V4, who's been equally brazen of late. Let's see how they both perform. This is V2 Snail, leader of the Vesper 2nd Squad. I will chair the briefing for this mission. This is an operation of my own design. Consider it a privilege to be called to participate. You will be attacking The Wall, a key trading outpost fortified by the Rubicon Liberation Front. The rabble have formed a defensive line comprised of artillery and MT squads. Break through the line, then make your way to the top of the wall. There you shall find the Juggernaut, a mobile heavy artillery platform. Destroy it. V4 will also be participating in this mission, infiltrating through a separate route. However, be aware that Balam has also taken a crack at the wall, only for their vainglorious hopes to be dashed. Do try not to die like a dog out there.
In that first clip, Walter is behaving very respectfully towards Snail, and in return, Snail is extremely rude to Walter, dismissive and condescending. The voice actor does a fantastic job of injecting so much seething condescension into every single one of Snail's lines. Know your place, you meager dog sitter. This is the first time we ever hear Snail's voice in the game, and he is immediately unlikable, smug, arrogant, treating those around him terribly. Moving forward to the briefing, he actually says, "Consider it a privilege to be allowed to participate in my amazing mission. I'm so impressive. I did such a good job planning it. Snail is written to be just as cartoonish and clownish, just as much of an exaggerated stereotype as Michigan, but in a different way. Snail's smugness and condescension are super over the top, very exaggerated. This guy is like Lex Luthor levels of egomaniacal, totally obsessed with himself and impressed with himself. And it's not as if his attack plan for the wall is even vaguely impressive or interesting. Like, his plan just boils down to, you and this other guy are going to attack it and destroy everything. And that's it. Oh wow, what an impressive plan. Like, how long did it take you to come up with that one, Snail? So honored to be allowed to participate in such an interestingly planned attack. For all his smugness and condescension, Snail doesn't have all that much to be smug about. He never displays any exceptional intelligence. All he ever does is throw disposable soldiers at a problem until either his own soldiers or the problem is dead, then betray the weakened survivors the first chance he gets. His plans never involve any creativity or ingenuity. He's not some master tactician. Snail can seem like a more impressive or more competent commander than Michigan because Snail actually wins, but I think that's less a result of Snail's individual talents and more a result of the strength of Arquebus, or perhaps just a result of All Mind's secret behind-the-scenes support. But even if he's not a tactical genius, Snail definitely is a backstabbing butthole. Snail orders Rusty to abandon Raven during the battle against the Juggernaut, in hopes that Raven would be killed and Arquebus could claim sole credit for the victory. Later on, Snail betrays Balam during the joint mission against the Ice Worm, abandoning the fight to go help Arquebus seize PCA equipment. And finally, during the attack on Institute City, one of his comrades, Vesper Squad leader Maeterlinck, repeatedly asks Snail for support, which he ignores. She dies, begging him for help. He threw her life away for basically no reason. Her death served no purpose. Human life has no value to Snail, not even the lives of his closest comrades. They are all just pawns on the board to him, to be thrown away for any reason or no reason at all. And the sneaky Snail tricks Raven too, which we'll see in this next scene.
Voices from the past fading into...
No! 61, move!
Raven, you're losing control!
Damn it! They were once away!
Target neutralized. Yes. I left the subject alive as instructed. Only a fool would try to outfox Arquebus. I'll see that the unruly dog is punished and brought to heel. Oh, and of course, let's not forget the Hound's master either.
Snail is a devious bastard. He waits until Raven destroys the Ibis series mech, which is one of the most brutal fights in the entire game, and then swoops in, fires off a single stun missile, and seizes all the rewards of our hard work. Again, this isn't a brilliant strategy or anything. It doesn't take a genius to do what Snail did here, to sit on your butt and let your enemy do all the work for you, then hit them with a taser from behind. After this scene, Snail probably drags Raven off to his personal dungeons for torture and re-education. Because Snail isn't just a cartoonishly smug jerk. He's also a brutal and evil sadist who loves inflicting pain on people he believes are beneath him, which is everyone. He believes everyone is beneath him. This is the opposite of the reveal that we got with Michigan. Michigan was a buffoonish clown who turned out to have a heart of gold. Snail is also something of a clown, but he turns out to have a black hole where his heart should be. He is genuinely evil, and more than that, as we'll see in our final confrontation with him, he's also violently insane, an actual crazy person. But before we get to that, I want to read some more arena bios. Let's start with Snail's. It reads, Deputy Commander of the Vespers, the Arquebus Group's augmented human squad. After receiving Generation 8 augmentation surgery, Snail continued to receive follow-up treatments as new technologies entered the mainstream, so as to make their merits his own. Many augmented humans have died in order to assure the safety of his repeated adjustments. It is interesting to note that Snail is not the actual commander of the Vespers. It can kinda seem like he is. He's the one we see on screen the most, he's the one who makes all their battle plans. But in spite of his massive superiority complex, Snail is not even the best or most important AC pilot in his own organization. A guy called Freud is the actual commander of the Vespers, someone who outperforms Snail, in spite of not having any augmentations at all. Though Freud barely appears in the game, Snail is someone who is constantly artificially improving his body through augmentation, losing more and more of his humanity with each surgery, until his outward appearance matches his cold alien inner personality. I think Snail is someone who possesses relatively little natural talent. He has to constantly augment himself with the most advanced new procedures to get an edge in battle. And even then, he's ranked far below the best pilots in the game. Freud, Michigan, Dolmayan, and even a couple independent mercenaries are all ranked above him in the arena. Snail is also someone who sacrifices the lives of others to build himself up. There's a vampire quality to his character. He is metaphorically sucking the blood of others to empower himself. I also want to talk a little bit about his call sign, Snail, because I think it is relevant to his character. Snails are not impressive creatures. Like, nobody ever goes to the zoo and says, "Oh boy, I sure hope they have the snails on exhibit today. I can't wait to see the snails." The snail is a slimy little thing, a bit of a pest. They are not strong, not fast, and not smart. When threatened, they don't fight, they hide in their little shells. All of this matches Snail's character in Armored Core 6. He is slimy, he is weak, he hides while better men do the fighting for him. Moving on, next I want to look at Maeterlinck's bio. The pilot Snail callously sacrificed for no purpose in Institute City. It reads, unfailingly loyal to Arquebus, she has a reliable track record in the field, and her conduct during missions has established her as a risk-averse problem solver. Maeterlinck was a totally loyal soldier to Arquebus, and thus to Snail, her commanding officer, and her loyalty was rewarded by getting thrown away like garbage for no reason. The other people Snail betrays and tricks over the course of the game, like Raven or Balam, were technically either enemies or at least non-aligned. But Maeterlinck was a different kind of betrayal. She was a comrade, and not just any comrade, but a loyal and effective soldier. Loyalty has no value to Snail. Being good at what you do has no value to him. No matter how many times Raven proves himself, Snail never shows us an ounce of respect. So what does Snail value? And I think the true answer is that he doesn't value anything but himself. He doesn't care about other people, he only cares about how he can use them. Next, let's talk a little bit about re-education, which is Snail's specialty. The name itself is extremely ominous, invoking images of oppressive re-education camps set up by tyrannical authorities to force political dissidents to submit to government domination. The famous dystopian novel 1984 by George Orwell includes a long section in which the main character is trapped in a re-education center. And it's easily the most horrific part of what is already a really horrific book. We're given relatively few details about Arquebus's re-education center, but none of those details are good. We see its effects on Walter, whose free will is destroyed and he is forced to fight for Arquebus. Through him, we see that the purpose of the re-education is to, through torture and forced augmentation, destroy free will, turn people into slaves. I don't know for sure that Snail himself personally oversees this re-education, though doing so would fit his personality, and his dialogue in Institute City suggests that he will personally punish Raven. Either way, Snail is the one who orders inmates into re-education, which includes members of the Rubicon Liberation Front, members of the Balam private military, and even his comrades in the Vespers. If you spare Swinburne, Snail sends him to re-education. Through his association with the re-education process, the writers turn Snail into a truly despicable villain. If you follow the Liberator of Rubicon route, we get to see what I think is Snail's most narratively satisfying ending, the one where he reveals his truly insane and egomaniacal ambitions. And I want us to listen to some of Snail's dialogue in this fight, because I find the things he says here to be really interesting, so here it is.
Raven the independent mercenary. You're not the mutt I thought you were.
That machine!
You're below that. You are vermin! The silent is doomed. Good. It would be most inconvenient to see our hard-won coral go up in smoke. Rabble-rousing the locals. Another inconvenience, but I'll overlook that. No, your crime is that you tried to kill me. Kill Arquebus. You are vermin, and I will be rid...
Energy output is ramping up again.
Out of my sight, vermin! That traitor V4, those don'ts at command! And worst of all, you, the pest of Rubicon who stirred the cinders! You sicken me, all of you! I'll crush you underfoot! I am Arquebus! No, I am Arquebus! One last plan!
Confirmed. V2 Snail, down.
I love how this fight begins. Snail starts out by saying, "Raven, you're not the mutt I thought you were." And then there's this long pause, and it seems as if Snail is finally showing you some respect, finally recognizing your value, recognizing that you are a worthy opponent, not just a mutt. But then, nope. He's like, "You're worse than a mutt, you're vermin." And the reason we are less than a mutt is because we've annoyed him. In Snail's eyes, our value as a human being is not affected by our strength, not affected by how good of a fighter we are, not affected by our influence on the planet Rubicon, but solely by how annoying we are to him personally. I mean, no one has any value in his eyes regardless of any of those factors, but people who are annoying have even less value. Snail has a totally warped perception of the world, where everything is colored by his raging superiority complex. I love this moment towards the end of the fight, when Snail realizes that he's losing and he finally loses his cool, finally loses his composure. These are some of my favorite kinds of villain moments, when the perpetually cool-headed villain finally reveals their true character in a rage-filled tantrum during the final battle. Snail's monologue here is insane. He rants and raves against everyone, friends and foes alike. They all sicken him. He has nothing but contempt for them all. And that final cry, "I am Arquebus," is truly unhinged. Because he isn't Arquebus. Arquebus is an intergalactic megacorporation with probably dozens of subsidiaries, hundreds of thousands of employees across who knows how many planets. Snail is not the CEO of Arquebus. He is not on their board of directors. He's not even the commander of the Vespers. He's just the deputy commander. He might as well be nothing to this company, another tool, another pawn. In the end, Snail dies on this backwater planet, far from the centers of power. In the end, he isn't Arquebus, he isn't anyone, just one more dead soldier in the endless wars between megacorporations. One more corporate casualty, irrelevant, without influence, forgotten by everyone. Except for the purposes of our analysis, he kind of is Arquebus. The whole thesis of this essay is that Michigan and Snail both become the faces of their respective corporations. Through their exaggerated personalities, they define who Balam and Arquebus are. Through Michigan, Balam becomes this comical, blundering personality, never as successful as their rival, with selfish intentions, but at the core good-hearted, respectful, loyal, but also ultimately irrelevant, swept off the board long before the finale. Through Snail, Arquebus becomes this arrogant, smug, condescending, egomaniacal personality, devious, backstabbing, cunning, and vicious, which doesn't value human life, doesn't value loyalty, doesn't treat anyone with respect, and is also ultimately irrelevant. Sure, Arquebus makes it to the end, or at least pretty close to it, but neither of these corporations are successful in any of the conclusions. The coral is either burned, freed, or released, but it is never seized by Arquebus or Balam. In the end, both Balam and Arquebus are just bit players in a story that goes so far beyond their petty and selfish corporate ambitions. All they cared about was profits and greed. But this is a story about human evolution, and material wealth is irrelevant to that evolution, and so are these corporations. In the end, for all their exaggerated personalities, for all their differences, both Michigan and Snail end up in the same place, in the cold, hard ground, dead. They both made the same fatal mistake of tying their fates to the will of these soulless corporations instead of forging their own destinies. In a story about the triumph of the individual will, there is no greater mistake than that. Both Michigan and Snail and every other character who bound their fate to that of the corporations were doomed from the very start, regardless of how ultimately benevolent or devious they could be.